The Tale of Prince Ahmed and the Fairy Peri-Banu. By Traditional Arabian Tale. Brought to you by TellStory.net, stories from around the world. Prince Hassan would not honor the wedding feast. He could barely stand to see Princess Nuranihar in Prince Ali's arms, believing he deserved her no less than his victorious brother. Leaving the court behind, he renounced all claims to the throne and became a dervish under a renowned sheikh who dwelt in peaceful solitude with his many disciples. Prince Ahmed also stayed away from the celebration, though he chose a different path from his brother Hassan. He could not fathom what had become of his arrow, and resolved to search for it so he might reproach himself with nothing. Slipping away from his attendants, he returned to where Princes Hassan's and Ali's arrows had been found, and walked straight forward from that spot, scanning carefully on both sides. He traveled so far that he began to think his efforts wasted, yet something compelled him onward until he reached steep, craggy rocks in a barren country, some 4 leagues from where he had started. Near these rocks, he discovered an arrow lying flat upon the ground. He picked it up and examined it closely, astonished to find it was indeed his own.
Surely, neither I nor any living man could shoot an arrow to such a distance,
he said to himself. Seeing it laid flat rather than stuck in the ground, he judged it had bounced off the rock.
There must be some mystery here, and perhaps fortune, having denied me what I thought would bring the greatest happiness, has kept a greater blessing in reserve.
The rocks were full of sharp points and crevices. Ahmed, filled with these thoughts, entered a cavity and soon noticed an iron door that appeared to have no lock. He feared it might be fastened, but when he pushed, it swung open easily, revealing a gentle descent without steps. Taking his arrow in hand, he walked downward. Though he expected darkness, he soon found himself bathed in an altogether different light from that above. 50 or 60 paces ahead, he saw a magnificent palace. Before he could properly observe it, a lady of majestic bearing and extraordinary beauty advanced to the porch, attended by a company of ladies among whom it was difficult to distinguish the mistress. The richness of her garments and her jewels added nothing to her beauty. She was radiant beyond measure. When Prince Ahmed saw her, he hastened to pay his respects. The lady, seeing him approach, spoke first.
"Come near, Prince Ahmed. You are welcome."
The prince was astonished to hear his name in a palace he had never known existed, so close to his father's capital, and he could not understand how this stranger knew him. He threw himself at her feet, then rose and said,
Madam, I return you 1,000 thanks for welcoming me to this place, though my curiosity may have led me too far. But may I ask, without being rude, how you know me? And why you, living so near, should be unknown to me?
"Prince, let us go into the hall. There I will answer your questions."
She led Prince Ahmed into the hall, whose structure and decoration, the gold and azure that embellished the dome, the incredible richness of the furnishings, were beyond anything he had seen.
"I can assure you, this is but a small part of my palace. You will understand when you have seen all the apartments."
She sat upon a sofa and invited him to sit as well.
"You are surprised that I should know you while being unknown to you, but you will not be surprised when I tell you who I am. You must know that the world is inhabited by genies as well as men. I am the daughter of one of the most powerful genies, and my name is Peri-Banu. I know you, your father the Sultan, your brothers, and the Princess Nuranihar. I am familiar with your love and your travels, for it was I who placed for sale the artificial apple you bought at Samarkand, the carpet Prince Hassan found at Bisnagar, and the tube Prince Ali brought from Skyraz. This should show you I know everything that concerns you. The only thing I must add is that you seemed worthy of better fortune than marrying Princess Nuranihar. I was present when you shot your arrow, and foresaw it would not fly beyond Prince Hassan's. I took it in the air and made it strike these rocks where you found it. It is in your power to make use of this favorable opportunity."
As Peri-Banu spoke these words, Prince Ahmed began to see that Princess Nuranihar could never be his, and that this fairy before him exceeded her infinitely in beauty, charm, and, judging from the magnificence of her palace, in wealth.
Madam, if I could spend my entire life as your servant, I would count myself the happiest of men. Pardon my boldness, and do not refuse to admit into your court a prince who is entirely devoted to you.
"Prince, I have long been my own mistress, not dependent on my parents' consent. I would not admit you as a slave, but as my husband, if you will pledge your faith to me. The same customs are not observed among fairies as among other ladies."
Prince Ahmed could not express his gratitude better than by kissing the hem of her garment.
Then, you are my husband, and I am your wife. As I suppose you have eaten nothing today, a meal shall be served while preparations are made for our wedding feast this evening. Then I will show you the apartments of my palace, and you shall judge if this hall is truly the smallest part.
Some of the fairy's women, who had entered the hall with them and guessed her intentions, left and returned shortly with excellent food and wine. After Prince Ahmed had refreshed himself, Peri-Banu took him through all the rooms. He saw diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and jewels of every kind mixed with pearls, agate, jasper, porphyry, and the most precious marbles. The richness of the furnishings was such that the prince admitted nothing in the world could compare to it.
Prince, if you admire my palace so greatly, what would you say to the palaces of the chiefs of our genies, which are far more beautiful, spacious, and magnificent? I could also delight you with my garden, but we will save that for another time. Night approaches, and it will soon be time for supper.
The next hall, where the cloth was laid, was the only room the prince had not yet seen, and it was no less magnificent than the others. He admired the infinite number of perfumed wax candles that created such agreeable light, and a large sideboard displaying gold plates so finely wrought that the craftsmanship exceeded the value of the gold itself. Several beautiful women, richly dressed and possessing ravishing voices, began a concert accompanied by harmonious instruments he had never heard before. When they sat down to table, Peri-Banu helped Prince Ahmed to the most delicious meats, dishes he had never encountered but found so exquisite that he praised them highly. The wines, which they did not taste until the dessert of choice sweetmeats and fruits, were equally excellent. After the meal, the fairy and Prince Ahmed rose from the table and sat on a sofa with cushions of fine silk embroidered with large flowers, while genies and fairies danced before them. The days following their wedding were filled with continuous feasting, which Peri-Banu diversified with ease, new dishes, new concerts, new dances, new entertainments so extraordinary that Prince Ahmed, had he lived 1,000 years among men, could not have imagined them. After 6 months, Prince Ahmed, who had always loved and honored his father, felt a great desire to know how the Sultan fared. This desire could only be satisfied by going to hear it himself, so he mentioned it to the fairy and asked for her permission. This request alarmed the fairy, making her fear it was an excuse to leave her.
My queen, if I have offended you, I beg your forgiveness. I did not mean to displease you, but acted from respect toward my father, whom I wish to free from the grief my long absence must have caused. He likely believes me dead.
Prince, I am so convinced of your sincerity that I grant you permission, provided your absence is not long.
Prince Ahmed would have thrown himself at her feet in gratitude, but she prevented him.
Prince, go when you please, but first let me give you advice on how to conduct yourself. I do not think it proper for you to tell your father of our marriage, or what I am, or where you have settled. Ask him to be satisfied knowing you are happy and desire nothing more. Let him know that the sole purpose of your visit is to ease his mind about your fate.
She appointed 20 horsemen, well mounted and equipped, to escort him. When all was ready, Prince Ahmed took leave of the fairy, embraced her, and renewed his promise to return soon. His horse, as beautiful as any in the Sultan of the Indies stables, was brought, and he mounted with extraordinary grace that pleased the fairy greatly. After bidding her a final farewell, he set out on his journey. The distance to his father's capital was not great, and Prince Ahmed arrived quickly. The people, glad to see him again, received him with cheers and followed him in crowds to the Sultan's palace. The Sultan welcomed and embraced him with great joy, though he complained with fatherly tenderness of the affliction his long absence had caused. He admitted that, since fortune had decided in favor of Prince Ali, he had feared Ahmed might have done something desperate.
Sir, your majesty knows that when I shot my arrow, the strangest thing befell me. In so large a plain, it was impossible to find it. Though vanquished, I did not waste time in complaint. To satisfy my puzzled mind, I slipped away from my attendants and returned alone to search. I looked everywhere around the place where my brother's arrows were found, and where I imagined mine must have fallen, but my labor was vain until, after traveling 4 leagues to where the plain meets the rocks, I found an arrow. I ran and took it up, and knew it for the one I had shot. Far from believing your majesty had done me any injustice in choosing Prince Ali, I interpreted what happened quite differently and never doubted there was a mystery that might work to my advantage. I discovered its nature without going far from that spot. But regarding this mystery, I beg your majesty to let me keep silent, and be satisfied to know from my own lips that I am happy and content. This was my only reason for coming, and the only favor I ask is permission to visit often, to pay my respects and inquire after your health.
Son, I cannot refuse you this permission, but I would much prefer you stay with me. At least tell me where I may send word to you should you fail to come, or when I think your presence necessary.
Answered the Sultan.
Sir, what your majesty asks is part of the mystery I spoke of. I beg you to allow me to remain silent on this matter. I shall come so frequently that I fear I shall more likely be thought troublesome than negligent in my duty.
The Sultan pressed Prince Ahmed no further.
Son, I will not pry into your secrets. I leave you at liberty. I can only say that nothing would give me greater pleasure than your visits, for your presence restores the joy I have not felt in a long time. You will always be welcome.
Prince Ahmed stayed but 3 days at his father's court, and on the 4th returned to Peri-Banu, who received him with great joy, not having expected him so soon. A month later, the fairy observed that since Ahmed had given her an account of his journey and his conversation with his father, in which he asked permission to visit from time to time, he had never mentioned the Sultan again, as though no such person existed. One day she said to him,
Tell me, Prince, have you forgotten your father? Do you not remember the promise you made to visit him regularly? I have not forgotten what you told me when you returned. Pay him another visit tomorrow, and after that, go once a month without asking my permission. I consent readily.
Prince Ahmed went the next morning with the same attendants as before, but more magnificently mounted, equipped, and dressed. The Sultan received him with the same joy and satisfaction. For several months thereafter, he paid these visits regularly, always in richer and more brilliant style. Eventually, some of the Sultan's favorite viziers, who judged Prince Ahmed's grandeur and power by the figure he presented, abused the liberty the Sultan gave them to speak freely. They made him jealous of his son, representing that it was only prudent to discover where the prince had withdrawn and how he could afford to live so richly, having no assigned revenue or income. They suggested he seemed to come to court only to show off, and that it was to be feared he might win the people's favor and overthrow the Sultan. The Sultan, who was far from believing Prince Ahmed capable of such wickedness, said to them,
You are mistaken. My son loves me, and I am assured of his tenderness and fidelity. Nevertheless, I am obliged to you for your advice, which I believe comes from good intentions.
The Sultan said this so his favorites would not know their hints had affected him. Yet he was so alarmed that he resolved to have Prince Ahmed watched, without the knowledge of his Grand Vizier. He sent for a sorceress, who was brought through a private door into his chamber.
My son Ahmed visits my court every month, but I cannot learn from him where he resides, nor do I wish to force his secret from him. I believe you are capable of satisfying my curiosity without letting him or any of my court know. When he is here with me, he leaves without taking leave of me or my court. Go now to the road, discover where he withdraws, and bring me word.
The sorceress left the Sultan. Knowing the place where Prince Ahmed had found his arrow, she went there and hid among the rocks where no one could see her. The next morning, Prince Ahmed set out at daybreak without taking leave of either the Sultan or his court, as was his custom. The sorceress, seeing him coming, followed him with her eyes until suddenly she lost sight of him and his attendants. The steepness of the rocks formed an impassable barrier, whether on horseback or on foot. The sorceress concluded there were but two possibilities: the prince had withdrawn into some cavern, or into some underground place, an abode of genies or fairies. When she thought the prince and his attendants were out of sight, she emerged from hiding and went directly to the hollow where she had seen them enter. She examined it carefully, proceeding through its windings and looking on all sides, but despite her diligence, she could find no opening nor the iron door that Prince Ahmed had discovered. This door could be seen and opened only by men, and only by men whose presence pleased Peri-Banu, not by women at all. The sorceress, seeing her search was futile, had to content herself with the discovery she had made. She returned to give the Sultan an account. After telling him what she had done, she added,
Your Majesty can easily understand that it will be no difficult matter to give you the information you desire about Prince Ahmed's conduct. To do this, I need only time, and I ask you to have patience and allow me to proceed without inquiring about my methods.
The Sultan was pleased with the sorceress's conduct.
Do as you think best, I will wait patiently.
To encourage her, he gave her a diamond of great value, telling her it was only an advance on the ample reward she would receive when she completed this important service. Since Prince Ahmed never failed to visit once a month, and the sorceress knew the time, she went a day or two before to the foot of the rock where she had lost sight of the prince and his attendants. There she waited with a plan she had formed. The next morning, Prince Ahmed left through the iron gate with his usual attendants and passed by the sorceress, whom he did not recognize as such. Seeing her lying with her head against the rock, complaining as if in great pain, he took pity. He turned his horse around and asked what was the matter and what he could do to help. The artful sorceress, without lifting her head, looked at the prince and answered in broken words and sighs, as if she could barely breathe, that she had been traveling to the city when she was struck by such a violent fever that her strength failed. She was forced to lie down far from any home and without hope of help.
Good woman, you are not as far from aid as you think. I am ready to assist you and take you where you will receive care and find a quick cure. Only get up, and let one of my men carry you.
The sorceress, who feigned illness only to learn where the prince lived, did not refuse the offer he made so freely. To show her acceptance through action rather than words, she made many affected efforts to rise, pretending her sickness prevented her. Two of the prince's attendants dismounted, helped her up, and set her behind another rider. They mounted again and followed the prince, who turned back toward the iron gate. One of his men who rode ahead opened it. When he came into the outer court of the fairy's palace, Prince Ahmed, without dismounting, sent word that he wished to speak with Peri-Banu. The fairy came quickly, not knowing what made Prince Ahmed return so soon. Before she could ask, he said,
My princess, I ask that you have compassion on this woman.
Pointing to the sorceress, who was being helped down by two of his men.
I found her in the condition you see and promised her the help she needs. I commend her to your care, knowing you will not abandon her.
Peri-Banu kept her eyes fixed on the pretended invalid while the prince spoke. She then ordered two of her women to take the sorceress from the men and carry her into the palace, giving her all necessary care. While the women carried out her orders, the fairy approached Prince Ahmed and whispered in his ear,
Prince, I commend your compassion, which is worthy of you, but let me tell you I fear it will be poorly rewarded. This woman is not as sick as she pretends, and I am very much mistaken if she has not been sent here to cause you great trouble. But do not worry, whatever is devised against you, I assure you I will deliver you from all snares. Go and continue your journey.
This warning did not alarm Prince Ahmed in the least.
My princess, as I do not remember ever injuring anyone or intending to, I cannot believe anyone wishes to harm me. But even if they do, I shall not stop doing good whenever I have the chance.
With that, he took leave of the fairy and set out again for his father's capital, where he soon arrived and was received as usual by the Sultan, who restrained himself as much as possible to hide the suspicions his favorites had planted. Meanwhile, the two women Peri-Banu had commanded carried the sorceress into a fine apartment richly furnished. They set her on a sofa with her back supported by a cushion of gold brocade, then prepared a bed with an embroidered silk quilt, the finest linen sheets, and a cloth of gold coverlet. When they put her into bed, for the old sorceress pretended her fever was so violent she could not help herself, one woman left and soon returned with a porcelain cup full of liquid.
Drink this. It is water from the fountain of lions, a sovereign remedy against all fevers. You will feel its effects in less than an hour,
she said, presenting it to the sorceress while the other helped her sit up. The sorceress, to maintain her pretense, took the cup only after much pretended reluctance, as if forcing herself greatly. She shook her head and swallowed the liquid. When she lay down again, the two women covered her.
Lie quiet and sleep if you can. We will return in an hour and hope to find you perfectly cured.
The sorceress, who had come not to play sick for long but to discover Prince Ahmed's retreat and what made him leave his father's court, was fully satisfied regarding what she wanted to know. She would gladly have declared that the potion had worked immediately, so great was her desire to return to the Sultan and inform him of her mission's success. But having been told the potion did not work instantly, she was forced to wait for the women's return. The two women came back at the appointed time and found the sorceress up, dressed, and seated on the sofa. When they opened the door, she cried out,
"Oh, what an admirable potion! It has cured me much sooner than you said, and I have been waiting impatiently to ask you to take me to your kind mistress so I may thank her. I shall always be grateful for her goodness. Being cured as by a miracle, I would rather not lose time but continue my journey."
The two women, who were fairies like their mistress, told the sorceress how glad they were of her swift recovery. They walked before her and led her through several apartments into a large hall, the most richly and magnificently furnished in all the palace. Peri-Banu sat in this hall on a throne of solid gold, attended on each side by many beautiful fairies, all richly dressed. At the sight of such majesty, the sorceress was so dazzled that after prostrating herself before the throne, she could not speak to thank the fairy as she had intended. Peri-Banu spared her the trouble.
Good woman, I am glad I could help you and that you are able to continue your journey. I will not detain you, but perhaps you would like to see my palace. Follow my women, and they will show you.
The old sorceress, who had neither power nor courage to say a word, prostrated herself a second time with her head on the carpet at the foot of the throne, then took her leave. She was conducted by the two fairies through all the apartments that had been shown to Prince Ahmed on his first arrival. What surprised her most was that the fairies told her all she saw and admired was merely a sketch of their mistress's grandeur and riches, and that in her dominions there were so many palaces they could not count them, all of different architecture yet equally magnificent and superb. They led her at last to the iron gate through which Prince Ahmed had brought her. After she took her leave and thanked them for their trouble, they opened the gate and wished her a pleasant journey. After the sorceress had gone a little way, she turned back to observe the door and recognize it again, but in vain. As before mentioned, it was invisible to her and all other women. Satisfied in all other respects with her work, she hurried away to the capital. When she arrived, she went by many back streets to the private door of the palace. The Sultan, being informed of her arrival, sent for her into his apartment. Seeing a melancholy look on her face, he thought she had not succeeded.
"From your expression, I suspect you have not made the discovery I expected."
"Sire, your Majesty must allow me to say you should not judge by my looks whether I have accomplished your commands. The melancholy you see comes from another cause than failure."
Then the sorceress related to the Sultan the entire story from beginning to end. When she had finished, she said,
"What does your Majesty think of these unheard of riches of the fairy? Perhaps you will say you rejoice in Prince Ahmed's good fortune. For my part, sire, I beg your forgiveness if I take the liberty to say I think otherwise, and I shudder when I consider what misfortunes may befall you. This is the cause of the melancholy you saw. Though I believe Prince Ahmed is incapable by his own nature of undertaking anything against your Majesty, who can say that the fairy, by the influence she already has over him, might not inspire him with the dangerous design of dethroning you and seizing the crown of the Indies? This is what your Majesty should seriously consider."
Though the Sultan was very sure of Prince Ahmed's good disposition, he could not help being troubled by the old sorceress's warnings. He thanked her for her work and her caution, saying,
"I am aware of its great importance. I shall take counsel upon it."
He had been consulting with his favorites when the sorceress arrived, so he ordered her to follow him to them. He told them what he had learned and communicated the reason he had to fear the fairy's influence over the prince. He asked them what measures they thought proper to prevent so great a misfortune. One of the favorites, speaking for the rest, said,
"Your Majesty knows who must be behind this mischief. To prevent it, now that he is in your court and in your power, you should not hesitate to imprison him. I will not say take his life, for that would cause too much uproar, but make him a close prisoner for as long as he lives."
All the other favorites unanimously approved this advice. The sorceress, who thought this too violent, asked the Sultan's permission to speak. When it was granted, she said,
"Sire, I am convinced that your counselors' zeal for your Majesty's interests makes them propose arresting Prince Ahmed. But they will not take it amiss if I suggest that if you arrest the prince, you must also detain his retinue. Yet they are all genies. Do they think it will be easy to surprise, seize, and secure them? Will they not disappear through their ability to make themselves invisible and transport themselves instantly to the fairy to tell her of the insult to her husband? Can it be supposed she will let this go unavenged? But it would be better if, by other means that would not cause such commotion, the Sultan could secure himself against any ill designs Prince Ahmed might have, assuming your majesty trusts my advice. Since genies and fairies can do things beyond human ability, he should challenge Prince Ahmed's honor and engage him, through the fairies' help, to obtain certain advantages. For example, every time your majesty takes the field, you incur great expense for pavilions and tents for yourself and your army, and for mules, camels, and other beasts to carry the baggage. Might you not ask him to use his influence with the fairy to procure you a tent that could be carried in a man's hand yet be large enough to shelter your entire army? I need say no more to your majesty. If the prince brings such a tent, you may make many other demands of the same nature, until at last he will fail under the difficulties and impossibilities of fulfilling them, no matter how clever the fairy who enchanted him may be. Eventually he will be ashamed to appear and will be forced to spend the rest of his life with his fairy, cut off from any connection with this world. Then your majesty will have nothing to fear and cannot be blamed for such a detestable act as shedding a son's blood or imprisoning him for life.
When the sorceress finished, the Sultan asked his favorites if they had anything better to propose. Finding them all silent, he decided to follow the sorceress's advice as the most reasonable and best suited to his mild manner of rule. The next day, the prince came into his father's presence and had sat beside him. They conversed on different subjects. Then the Sultan said,
Son, when you came and lifted those clouds of melancholy your long absence had brought upon me, you made a mystery of the place you had chosen for your retreat. I was content to see you again and know you were happy, without wishing to penetrate your secret, which I saw you preferred to keep. I do not know what reason you had for treating your father thus. I know of your good fortune now, and I rejoice with you. I much approve your decision to marry a fairy so worthy of your love and so rich and powerful. It was beyond my ability to arrange so great a match for you. Now that you are raised to such a high rank as to be envied by everyone but a father like me, I desire not only to preserve the good understanding between us, but that you should use all your influence with your fairy to obtain her help when I need it. I will put her to the test today. I am convinced you can easily get from her a pavilion that a man could carry in his hand, yet one that would extend over my whole army. This becomes more important when you let her know it is for me. Though this may be difficult, she will not refuse you. Everyone knows fairies are capable of the most extraordinary things.
Prince Ahmed never expected his father would ask for something that, at first sight, appeared so difficult, if not impossible. Though he did not know the full extent of genies and fairies' power, he doubted it stretched so far as to provide such a tent. Moreover, he had never asked anything of Peri-Banu but was satisfied with her continual kindness. He found himself in the greatest difficulty about how to answer. At last he replied,
Sire, if I have hidden from your majesty what happened to me and the choice I made after finding my arrow, it was because I thought the information was of no great concern to you. Though I do not know how this mystery was revealed, I cannot deny your information is correct. I have married the fairy you speak of. I love her and believe she loves me. But as to the influence your majesty believes I have over her, I cannot say anything. I have not yet tested it or even thought of it, and would be very glad if you would excuse me from attempting it, letting me enjoy the happiness of loving and being loved without other motives. But a father's demand is a command upon every child who thinks it his duty to obey in everything. Though it is with the greatest reluctance, I will ask my wife the favor your majesty desires, but I will not promise to obtain it. If I should not return to pay you my respects, that will be the sign I have not succeeded. Please forgive me beforehand and remember you yourself have forced me to this extremity.
Son, I would be very sorry if what I ask should prevent me from ever seeing you again. Go and ask her. Consider that as you love her, you could refuse her nothing, therefore, if she loves you, she will not deny your request.
All this could not persuade Prince Ahmed, who would rather his father had asked anything than risk displeasing Peri-Banu. His vexation was so great that he left the court 2 days earlier than usual. When he returned, the fairy, who had always seen him approach with a cheerful face, asked him the reason for the change. Finding that instead of answering he asked after her health to avoid her question, she said,
I will answer yours when you have answered mine.
The prince avoided it for a long time, insisting nothing was wrong. But the more he denied it, the more she pressed him.
I cannot bear to see you like this. Tell me what troubles you so I may remove the cause, whatever it may be. It must be extraordinary indeed if it is beyond my power.
Prince Ahmed could not long resist the fairy.
Madam, God prolong my father's life and bless him to the end of his days. I left him alive and in perfect health. That is not the cause of the melancholy you see in me. The Sultan has imposed upon me the disagreeable task of troubling you. You know the care I have taken, with your approval, to hide from him my happiness with you. How he was informed of it, I cannot tell.
Here Peri-Banu interrupted Prince Ahmed.
But I know. Remember what I told you about the woman who made you believe she was sick, on whom you took such pity. It is she who told your father. I told you she was no more sick than you or I. After the 2 women I charged with caring for her gave her the water, a remedy for fevers, though she had no need of it, she pretended it cured her and asked to be brought to take leave of me so she could sooner give an account of her mission's success. She was in such haste that she would have left without seeing my palace if I had not, by instructing my women to show it to her, made it understood that it was worth seeing. But go on and tell me what necessity your father has imposed on you that made you feel you might trouble me, though I assure you that you never can.
Madam, you may have observed that until now I have never asked you any favor. What more could I desire after possessing such a loving wife? I know how great your power is, but I have been careful not to test it. Consider, then, I beg you, that it is not I but my father who, imprudently in my opinion, asks you for a pavilion large enough to shelter him, his court, and his army from the weather when he takes the field, yet small enough for a man to carry in his hand. Once more, remember it is not I but my father who asks this favor.
Prince, I am sorry so small a matter disturbs you and makes you so uneasy. I see 2 things have contributed to this. One is the rule you imposed on yourself to be content with loving me and being loved by me, denying yourself the liberty of asking me the least favor to test my power. The other, I am sure despite your words, was that you thought what your father asked was beyond my ability. As to the first, I commend you for it and shall love you better if possible. As to the second, I must tell you what your father asks is a trifle, and upon occasion I can do far more difficult things. Be easy and convinced that, far from being troubled, I shall always take great pleasure in whatever you ask me to do for your sake.
Then the fairy sent for her treasurer, whose name was Nurjan.
Bring me the largest pavilion in my treasury.
Nurjan returned shortly with a pavilion that could not only be held but hidden in the palm of the hand when closed, and presented it to her mistress, who gave it to Prince Ahmed to examine. When Prince Ahmed saw the pavilion, which the fairy called the largest in her treasury, he thought she was joking with him, and his surprise showed on his face. Peri-Banu burst out laughing.
What, Prince, do you think I jest with you? You will see shortly that I am serious. Nurjan,
She said to her treasurer, taking the tent from Prince Ahmed's hands.
Go and set it up so the prince may judge whether his father will think it large enough.
The treasurer went out from the palace and carried it far enough that when she set it up, one end reached back to the palace. The prince, far from thinking it small, found it large enough to shelter 2 armies as numerous as his father's. Then he said to Peri-Banu,
I ask my princess 1,000 pardons for my disbelief. After what I have seen, I believe nothing is impossible to you.
You see, the pavilion is larger than your father may need, but you should know it becomes larger or smaller according to the army it must cover, without being touched.
The treasurer took down the tent, reduced it to its first size, brought it, and put it into the prince's hands. He took it, and the next day mounted his horse and went with his usual attendants to his father. The Sultan, convinced such a tent as he had requested was beyond all possibility, was greatly surprised at the prince's diligence. He took the tent and admired its smallness. But when he had it set up in the great plain and found it large enough to shelter an army twice as large as he could field, his amazement was beyond measure. Though he thought it might be troublesome to use, Prince Ahmed told him the size would always match his army. Outwardly the Sultan expressed great obligation to the prince for so noble a gift, asking him to return his thanks to Peri-Banu. He ordered it carefully placed in his treasury. But inwardly he grew even more jealous than before, considering that with the fairy's help, the prince could do things infinitely above his own power despite his greatness and riches. Intent upon his son's ruin, he went to consult the sorceress again, who advised him to ask the prince for some water from the fountain of lions. That evening, when the Sultan was surrounded as usual by his court and the prince came to pay his respects among the rest, he said to him,
Son, I have already expressed how obliged I am to you for the tent you procured for me, which I consider the most valuable thing in my treasury. But you must do one more thing for me, after which I shall expect nothing more from your obedience or your influence with your wife. I am informed that the fairy uses a certain water called the water from the Fountain of Lions, which cures all sorts of fevers, even the most dangerous. As I am perfectly sure my health is dear to you, I do not doubt you will ask her for a bottle of that water for me and bring it as a sovereign remedy I may use when needed. Do me this service and complete the duty of a good son toward a tender father.
Prince Ahmed, who had believed his father would be satisfied with so singular and useful a tent, was thunderstruck by this new demand despite the assurance the fairy had given him of granting whatever lay in her power. After a long silence, he said,
I beg your majesty to be assured there is nothing I would not do to prolong your life, but I wish it were not by means of my wife. For this reason I dare not promise to bring the water. All I can do is assure you I will ask her, but it will be with as great reluctance as when I asked for the tent.
The next morning, Prince Ahmed returned to Peri-Banu and related sincerely everything that had passed at his father's court, from presenting the tent, which the Sultan received with utmost gratitude, to the new request he had charged him to make. When he finished, he added,
But, my princess, I tell you this only as a plain account of what happened between me and my father. I leave it to your discretion whether to grant or reject this new desire. It shall be as you please.
No, no. Whatever advice the sorceress can give him, for I see he listens to her, he shall find no fault with you or me. There is much wickedness in this demand, as you will understand from what I am about to tell you. The Fountain of Lions is in the middle of a courtyard of a great castle whose entrance is guarded by 4 fierce lions, 2 sleep while the other 2 watch, alternately. But do not let that frighten you. I will give you the means to pass by them without danger.
Peri-Banu was at that time working with her needle. She had by her several balls of thread and took one up. Presenting it to Prince Ahmed, she said,
First, take this ball of thread. I will tell you its use shortly. Second, you must have 2 horses, one you will ride yourself, the other you will lead. It must be loaded with a sheep cut into 4 quarters and killed today. Third, you must have a bottle, which I will give you, to bring the water back. Set out early tomorrow morning. When you have passed the iron gate, throw this ball of thread before you. It will roll until it comes to the gates of the castle. Follow it, and when it stops, the gates will be open. You will see the 4 lions. They will wake each other by their roaring. Do not be frightened. Throw each a quarter of the sheep, then spur your horse and ride to the fountain. Fill your bottle without dismounting and return with the same speed. The lions will be so busy eating they will let you pass.
Prince Ahmed set out the next morning at the time appointed by the fairy and followed her directions carefully. When he reached the castle gates, he distributed the sheep quarters among the 4 lions. Passing through their midst with haste, he got to the fountain, filled his bottle, and returned as safely as he went. When he was a little distance from the castle gates, he looked back and saw 2 of the lions coming after him. He drew his saber and prepared to defend himself. But as he went forward, he saw one turn off the road and show by its head and tail that it came not to harm him but only to go before him, while the other stayed behind to follow. He put his sword back in its scabbard. Guarded in this manner, he arrived at the capital of the Indies. The lions never left him until they had escorted him to the gates of the Sultan's palace, after which they returned the way they came, though not without frightening all who saw them. Many fled or hid themselves, though the lions walked gently and showed no signs of fierceness. Many officers came to attend the prince while he dismounted and conducted him to the Sultan's apartments. The Sultan was conversing with his favorites when Ahmed approached the throne, laid the bottle at his father's feet, kissed the rich carpet covering the footstool, and rising, said,
I have brought you, sire, the health-giving water your majesty desired to keep in your treasury. I also wish you such health that you may never need to use it.
After the prince finished speaking, the Sultan placed him on his right hand and said,
Son, I am very obliged to you for this valuable gift and for the great danger you exposed yourself to on my account. I have been informed by the sorceress, who knows the Fountain of Lions, of the peril. But do me the pleasure of telling me by what incredible power you were preserved.
Sire, I have no share in the honor your majesty is pleased to give me. All credit is due to the fairy, my wife. I merely followed her good advice.
The Sultan showed outwardly all signs of joy but secretly became even more jealous. He withdrew to an inner apartment and sent for the sorceress. After conferring with her, the Sultan said to the prince the next day, in the midst of all his courtiers,
"Son, I have one more thing to ask of you, after which I shall expect nothing more from your obedience or your influence with your wife. This is to bring me a man no more than 1.5 feet tall, whose beard is 30 feet long, who carries upon his shoulders a bar of iron weighing 500 pounds, which he uses as a staff, and who can speak."
Prince Ahmed, who did not believe such a man existed in the world as his father described, would gladly have excused himself, but the Sultan persisted in his demand and told him the fairy could do more incredible things. The next day, the prince returned to Peri-Banu's subterranean kingdom and told her of his father's new demand, which he said he thought more impossible than the first two.
4. I cannot imagine that such a man exists or could exist in the world. Either he wants to test whether I am foolish enough to seek him, or if such a man does exist, he seeks my ruin. How can he suppose I could capture a man so small yet armed as he describes? What weapons could I use to force him to obey?
Do not frighten yourself, Prince. You ran a risk fetching the water from the Fountain of Lions for your father, but there is no danger in finding this man. He is my brother Skaber, who, though we both had the same father, is so different from me that his nature is so violent nothing can prevent him from showing bloody signs of his resentment at the slightest offense. Yet, on the other hand, he is so good as to oblige anyone in whatever they desire. He is made exactly as your father described him, and he has no other weapon than a bar of iron 500 pounds in weight, without which he never goes, and which makes him respected. I will send for him, and you shall judge the truth of what I tell you. Be prepared not to be frightened when you see him."
What, my queen? Do you say Skaber is your brother? Let him be as ugly or deformed as he may, I shall love and honor him, considering him as my nearest relation.
The fairy ordered a gold chafing dish set with fire under the porch of her palace, along with a box of the same metal. Taking incense from it and throwing it into the fire, a thick cloud of smoke arose. Some moments later, the fairy said to Prince Ahmed,
"Prince, here comes my brother. Do you see him?"
The prince immediately saw Skaber, who was only 1.5 feet high, coming gravely with his heavy bar on his shoulder. His beard, 30 feet long, supported itself before him, and a pair of thick mustaches were tucked up to his ears, nearly covering his face. His eyes were very small, like a pig's, and sunk deep in his head, which was of enormous size. On it he wore a pointed cap, and besides all this, he had a hump behind and before. Had Prince Ahmed not known Skaber was Peri-Banu's brother, he would not have been able to look at him without fear. But knowing beforehand who he was, he waited for him with the fairy and received him without the least concern. Skaber, as he came forward, looked at the prince with an eye that might have chilled his soul and asked Peri-Banu, looking at Ahmed, who that man was. She replied,
"He is my husband, brother. His name is Ahmed. He is son to the Sultan of the Indies. The reason I did not invite you to my wedding was that I was unwilling to call you away from an expedition you were engaged in, from which I heard with pleasure you returned victorious. On his account I have taken the liberty now to send for you."
At these words, Skaber looked at Prince Ahmed with a favorable eye, though this did not diminish his fierceness or his savage look, and said,
Is there anything, sister, in which I can serve him? He has only to speak. It is enough for me that he is your husband.
"The Sultan his father has a curiosity to see you, and I desire he may be your guide to the Sultan's court."
He need but lead the way. I will follow him.
"Brother, it is too late to go today. Stay till tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I will tell you everything that has passed between the Sultan and Prince Ahmed since our marriage."
The next morning, after Skaber had been informed of all that was necessary for him to know, he set out with Prince Ahmed, who presented him to the Sultan. When they arrived at the gates of the capital, the people, seeing Skaber, ran and hid themselves in their shops and houses, shutting their doors. Others took to their heels and spread their fear to all they met, who likewise ran. As Skaber and Prince Ahmed went along, they found the streets and squares deserted until they came to the palace, where the porters, instead of stopping Skaber, also ran away. The prince and he advanced without obstacle to the council hall, where the Sultan was seated on his throne giving audience. Skaber, carrying his head erect, went fiercely up to the throne without waiting to be introduced by Prince Ahmed and addressed the Sultan in these words.
You have asked for me. See, here I am. What do you want with me?
The Sultan, instead of answering, clapped his hands before his eyes and turned away his head to avoid seeing so terrible an object. Skaber was so provoked at this uncivil and rude reception, after the Sultan had given him the trouble of coming so far, that he instantly lifted up his iron bar and, saying,
Speak then.
Let it fall on his head and killed him before Prince Ahmed could intervene. All Ahmed could do was prevent him from killing the Grand Vizier, who sat not far from the Sultan on his right hand, by pointing out that he had always given the Sultan good advice.
These are they, then, who gave him bad advice.
And as he spoke these words, he killed all the other viziers on the right and left, the flatterers and favorites who were Prince Ahmed's enemies. Every time he struck, he killed someone, and none escaped but those who were not frozen by fear and saved themselves by flight. When this terrible execution was over, Skaber came out of the council hall into the middle of the courtyard with his iron bar on his shoulder. Looking at the Grand Vizier, who owed his life to Prince Ahmed, he said,
I know there is a certain sorceress, who is a greater enemy of my brother-in-law than all those base favorites I have punished. Let her be brought to me at once.
The Grand Vizier immediately sent for her, and as soon as she was brought, Skaber said, knocking her down with his iron bar,
Take the reward of your pernicious counsel, and learn to feign illness again.
He left her dead on the spot. After this he said,
This is not enough. I will treat the whole city in the same way if they do not immediately acknowledge Prince Ahmed, my brother-in-law, as their Sultan and Sultan of the Indies.
Then all who were present made the air ring with repeated acclamations.
Long life to Sultan Ahmed.
Immediately afterward, he was proclaimed throughout the whole town. Skaber made him be clothed in royal garments and installed him on the throne. After all had done homage and sworn fidelity to him, Skaber went and fetched his sister Peri-Banu, whom he brought with great ceremony and made her acknowledged as Sultaness of the Indies. As for Prince Ali and Princess Nuranihar, since they had no part in the conspiracy against Prince Ahmed and knew of none, Prince Ahmed assigned them a considerable province with its capital, where they spent the rest of their lives. Afterward, he sent an officer to Prince Housen to inform him of the change and offer him whichever province he liked best. But that prince thought himself so happy in his solitude that he had the officer return his thanks to Sultan Ahmed for his kindness and assure him of his loyalty. He said the only favor he desired was permission to live retired in the place he had chosen for his retreat.